Hello, welcome to a very special episode of the Philosophy Uncorked podcast. This time we will be learning about the wonderful, brilliant, charismatic even Alan Simon's perspective on life. I will be here to guide the conversation gently and smoke cigarettes, and Alan will be sharing what he thinks about life, how to live it, what it means, etc., etc. It'll go wherever it goes. There are no rules, there are no restraints. This is a form of entertainment and joy. So without much further ado, let's get right into it. Alan, you want to kick off by telling us, in your perspective, what is the meaning of life?
Sure. First of all, I want to say that I hate that question. I've always hated that question. And so if my answer comes off as dismissive, don't take it personally.
I never would.
The reason that I don't like the question is because I think ever since I started studying religion in college when I was 18, so, 9, almost 10 years ago, I guess, which is crazy. I think every time I went back home or otherwise met up with, old friends, and people would ask me, what are you studying in college? And whenever I said religion, I think that was probably the most frequent question that I got first was, what is the meaning of life? Yeah. And I think in most cases, people were saying it kind of flippantly, kind of like not expecting an entirely serious answer.
Mm-hmm.
And, often it was in like party settings and stuff. So it's not really in a setting where I could give like this kind of answer where there's lots of nuances and qualifications and things like that. So generally highly dislike the question, but
I will, when you're ready, I will offer a defense of the question as well.
I don't need one because I think I have a good answer. It's just going to be like a very circuitous, heavily qualified answer.
Well, let's hear it.
Okay. So I guess the best way to start and maybe offer like a little bit of a tantalizing hook at the beginning here is, I think I came to the study of religion because I wanted to find the meaning of life, which is why I understand why people ask that question. And I think I left the study of religion, not that I actually have left it, but I think I walked away from college sort of with the opposite result of no longer feeling the need to have a meaning of life. Or let me rephrase that. I walked into it wanting an answer to the meaning of life and walked away finding the answer to that question to be unimportant.
Okay. So do you have a hierarchy of values? Things that you prioritize one over the other so that you can make decisions?
Sure. I think the way I wanted to structure this was to sort of like start, I guess, go back in time because, certainly there were times in my life where I at least had some kind of provisional meaning of life in mind. And I think where I'm at now is probably more about finding meaning in life rather than a meaning of life. And, after my little introductory diatribe, we can talk about, I'm sure you have like interesting thoughts on the distinction between the two. I do as well.
I was going to ask you for examples real quick so that everybody gets up to speed. What's an example of a time you had a meaning of life? An example of a time you found meaning in life?
Yeah, I think it's easier to just go through the full timeline.
Go for it.
Okay, so going back to middle school, high school years, I was kind of a science whiz. I liked science a lot, was really good at it. That was kind of my...
You're good at everything, Alan. Stop being so good at things.
I'm not very good at meaning of life stuff.
You're great.
That was kind of my identity in grade school. I was the science kid, the math science kid. So I think for a lot of people, it would probably be quite surprising to see the direction my life took. In any case, I think studying science made life feel meaningful to me for a while. I mean, I think that's one of the, at the core, one of science's most profound purposes is it's how human beings have made sense of the world. And so that was true for me too, on my own level, understanding the world around me. I don't know, there's a sense of peace that comes with kind of understanding like how things work at more of like a micro level. But I think what happened is as I got deeper and deeper into science and deeper into the looking at the micro level of things, I felt like I was sort of becoming more detached from that initial, what initially drew me into science. Because it started feeling like, the minute stuff that happens on the level of like modeling out things and like the more technical science gets, it sort of starts to get lost in its own like abstractly constructed, world of models and things like that. I didn't really feel like I was learning about our world anymore. And I sort of felt like what I had to learn about our world for my own purposes, I had kind of learned already.
Can I expand on that point real briefly?
Sure.
So like, this is something even Richard Dawkins talks about, but a lot of people do, that you can almost think of it in 3 levels. Like there's the real microscopic level where things happen in a way that doesn't make sense to us. This is especially true of quantum physics and so forth. And then there's our level, the human level, where essentially everything makes sense to us because it's the level we operate on. And then there's the cosmological level where, again, it doesn't make sense to us. It's just too big for us. And so what you seem to be saying is like what your journey in science did is you went to the microscopic level and you felt detached from the human level in that process.
Yeah, it's a good way. So thank you for that. I think it's important probably to clarify. I did get into astronomy a bit. I liked astronomy a lot, but really my passion was in chemistry. And so, yeah, getting deeper and deeper into the micro levels in which atoms, molecules, chemicals are interacting. It's just scribbles on a page.
Yeah.
And I never liked being in labs or doing any of the actual hands-on work. I like, me, I'm a reader, I'm a writer, so are you. I think basically anything in life I've ever found interesting, like academically, I probably found interesting purely on the basis of the writing itself. I mean, I liked reading science textbooks. I thought like that it was interesting. I thought it was interesting subject matter. I thought it was like an interesting medium of writing. So in retrospect, I don't think I was cut out for science professionally. I mean, possibly like I could have made it work. I'm sure I would have been capable of it. But I don't think it would have made me happy.
Yeah, and so you don't think that those science textbooks lack a little bit of literary flair?
I suppose a lot of people would, right? I guess, one area in which you and I differ is the extent to which we revel in literary flair.
Yeah, I'm all about it.
Yeah, I can appreciate it, and it's not what it's all about for me.
Yeah. I will say one thing, just for anybody who's listening, who might think that what I do is uniquely literary flair. I've done a lot of analytic and post-analytic philosophy, and so I do engage in writing that is very hyper oriented around clarity and precision in a way that's even sometimes more exacting than scientific literature, which can kind of let off the gas in terms of clarity and precision periodically in comparison to how precise analytic philosophy gets. And so, there is a side of me that's willing to indulge beyond literary flair. But Alan is totally right. You are totally right that I love the flair. I love the fireworks, the spectacle, the intoxication of reading somebody who knows how to write and who will communicate behind all the florid language something more powerful than the florid language itself. And clearly, I aspire to be like one of those people. So you're right to kind of call that out about me. And yet I want to clarify for anybody who's listening, I do other things too, you know. So
Yeah,
anyway, that's enough about me.
I'll
Let's
I'll
get
en-
back to your story.
I'll endorse that.
Yeah, you've
I
seen my writing, my philosophical writing before.
yeah,
You know it can be dry and clear and precise,
it
which
can
is
be both.
shocking
It
if
can
you
be
read my
both too.
Facebook posts.
It can be both. It can have
Yeah, periodically.
meaning. It can have meaning and flair.
Yeah, that's the goal. And for anybody listening, last thing I'll say, and then I want to get back to Alan's story, is Alan and I are co-authors of a few pieces now, and hopefully more to come. And I write in my way, and then Alan comes and makes it readable, basically. So anyway, go on.
Yeah. So, footnote, let's definitely have a lengthier chat at some point about these different philosophies on writing.
Oh yes.
But we're gonna go down a rabbit hole. So
It's uncorked. It's totally fine if we do.
So yes, I understand your point. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to the like teeth pulling aspect of reading science books.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't experience it that way. Anyway, towards the end of high school, my last semester, so I had a lot of downtime. Started getting back into reading fiction, which is something I did a lot as a kid. As a kid, I was reading like fantasy novels and things like that. High school, I really liked my English teachers. They really liked me. They liked my writing. Kind of were really, validating and supportive of, I guess, a new talent of mine that I kind of hadn't taken seriously up until that point.
Mm-hmm.
So I got into reading classics. I read a lot of Dostoevsky novels.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, I got really into Aldous Huxley's novels.
Mm-hmm.
And those two were sort of like my entry point into thinking about philosophy and religion more. And I think there was a lot internally that happened between that last year in high school and the summer before college. And as you know, when I was 21, I think I found out I had bipolar disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And in retrospect, the symptoms were certainly there starting when I was like 17. So right around this time, I was having like a whole reorientation of my academic interests. I think that coincided with what was happening to me psychologically. I was internal questions were becoming more important than external ones, sheerly due to what I was struggling with. And
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you a question about that real quick? Did you go through the experience of like essentially when you were suffering, the works felt more meaningful because the amount of pain you were in and the almost hope that you could derive of finding a purpose in the meaning? And then when you were not suffering, did you feel as though the works were just so sheerly delightful and you had so much you could write on your own about similar issues that it was a great enthusiasm that rushed through you, not because you were so in other words, both the suffering aspect of bipolar, the depression phase, and the manic or hypomanic phase could contribute to really embracing great works of literature. Did you feel that was the case? Both phases contributed, or did one phase contribute more?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Just to put it into my own words, I would say like in the midst of suffering and more like depressive phases, um, certainly I felt like sort of a sense of solidarity in what otherwise felt like a very lonely state.
Mm-hmm.
In that, I sort of recognized, maybe unconsciously at the time, something similar in the thoughts being conveyed on paper as things I was going through. And so
Mm-hmm.
it helped me sort of articulate what felt like very complicated feelings and things I just wasn't really able to make sense of.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then, yeah, to your point, when I was feeling better, it felt more like a positive or like constructive sense of meaning. Like there was, it felt very much like it's sort of like a whispering from like somewhere off into the distance that um, just sort of like kept sending me down what felt like some kind of trail that was leading somewhere. Um,
Mm-hmm. So, in on that note, just to expand your point and then hear more of your story, it sounds like in the first case, when you're in pain, articulating that pain seems to promise to cure it almost. Like if you could
uh,
articulate what's going on, you could
I
diminish its power over you. Is that not true in your case?
It wasn't true at the time, no.
Not that
um,
it does, but it seems to carry that promise. I'm not saying that you believe that, but I do.
sure, yeah, and I do now. Back then,
Mhm.
it didn't feel that way at all.
So, what was the benefit of articulating what you were going through? Just that there were words to express yourself to others or to yourself, or what was the reason why that was attractive to you?
More so to myself, but it's something that even still, I like didn't really have much of a benefit at all. I would say until like later on, um,
Hmm.
once I had gotten like a few more years under my belt of even like thinking about literature more.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, at the time, I think like what was keeping me more afloat was like the more positive moments of you know uh, feeling like there were some slumbering connections between the things I was reading, and not really exactly knowing the identity of those connections. And one book would lead me to another, and so like I said, it
Hmm.
felt like there was some trail being constructed of like roughly connected dots, that something was unfolding, and it in my sort of directionlessness of like kind of like cutting ties with what my identity had been for so long. um it felt like there was some direction to follow.
Oh wow. So it if I could try this out, it was
Try it out.
basically like you
Inhabit me.
I'm going to inhabit the Allen perspective if I can. Um, which by the way, for anybody listening, is an old joke Alan and I developed when I was defending various philosophers, and I we were talking to somebody, and I kept saying, "I'm just inhabiting their viewpoints, okay?" um, you know. Um, so basically, there was a great mystery going on about how everything somehow, despite surface level differences, was all part of a single mission for you, a
Right.
single exploration. And these very thin connections between the books would somehow be thickened once you could fully see how they all related to each other. And you felt you would get to that perspective or that point in your life where you would fully see everything as it is. And this reminds me of the quote which Aldous Huxley uses, but it's from William Blake, which you know. But once the doors of our perception are cleansed, we'll see everything as it is, infinite. Um, and that's where the doors of right perception comes from, the title of Aldous Huxley's book, and the Doors, the band as well. Um, so is that kind of the journey you were on? Like you were cleansing the doors of perception a little bit to maybe arrive at seeing everything as it really is?
Call me the Lizard King. No, yeah. So I think some version of that. And remember, like at the time, I didn't know in terms of like the bipolar stuff. I had no idea what was going on with me.
Mhm.
I just knew that like I was feeling more depressed than usual, more irritable, things like that. But like no one in my family, to my knowledge, like had any history of mental illness, and it's not
Mhm.
something I ever encountered growing up, either in friends or family or anything like that. So it didn't even like cross my mind that what I was experiencing was a form of mental illness. It um you know but it felt like whatever within me that felt foreign to me was responding to what I was reading. And so it was
Mm.
sort of like, you know, um, let me like feed this thing and see if it will reveal itself.
Oh, wow. So basically, Proust famously said that it's only in times of illness that we realize we live not alone, but chained to a foreign alien who cares nothing about us and to whom it's impossible to make ourselves known, our bodies. And it sounds like you had discovered the foreign nature of your own mind, so to speak. And you wanted these writers and these classics to show you who this mind was that was controlling all your emotions. And what it really was is what I'm hearing from you. It was really an illness to medicalize it. Um, but you thought it was like a presence, kind of like the presence of something so mysterious and powerful that you just wanted to get to know it.
Yeah, and something like a calling, like as an 18-year-old, I up until then, I felt like I had this direction in my life, like I was going to do science stuff. And like I was going to, part of the meaning of life that I was deriving at that point was like, I have a very promising future in science. Like I can do big science things and like,
Hmm.
make an impact on humanity by doing big science things.
Yeah.
So, the goal that I was striving towards, around which I was orienting the meaning of life, had evaporated. Um,
Hmm.
so I suppose like some combination of wishful thinking and the illness coalesced into what felt like a vocational calling, um,
Hmm.
that I felt like I could find meaning if I kept going down that road. And in the meantime, like the depression and stuff, I was just kind of like trying to ignore or like write off as something that was like kind of gonna pass, or like, you know, I could deal with it on my own. Like I didn't have to do anything about it. Like I was just gonna focus on the literature stuff and see where that goes, and hopefully everything will resolve itself on its own.
Did you go through the phase with depression where before you kind of recognize it as this force that overcomes you, you assume it's always responsive to the environment? Always? And I'm not saying that it isn't responsive to the environment, but did you go through the phase where you were like, well, it's today my professor ignored me when I raised my hand. That's
Mm.
why I'm sad. Um, I'm not sad because there's this helplessness to my existence that I can't resolve. I'm sad because of very specific events, and I can identify those events, and then I can change them, and then I won't be sad anymore. Did you go through that phase at all, or is that unrelated to your experience?
No, I think right away I recognized it as something different than that. Because
As the foreign presence, kind of.
yeah, because, I mean, I was a very happy kid. Not to say I'm
Hmm.
like an unhappy person now. I'm a pretty happy person now. And even then, like, you know, I had an underlying happiness about me. I don't think I ever got like super, I don't think I ever lost that completely. But anyway, it was immediately strange to me that the depth to which I was feeling those things and the extent to which I noticed it come on almost overnight. Like I remember like, one specific day, um,
Hmm.
like noticing it, not in the sense of like realizing like, oh, I've been feeling this way for a while, but like one specific day kind of note, like I have that memory of like the first time I felt like real depression, like down to the
Wow.
day.
I thought you were going to say down to the bone, but you know, it's,
Why not,
yeah,
down to the day, down to the bone.
down all the way. And you were down at that point in time emotionally.
I was down. I was physically down. A lot of the times I was just kind of on the ground, lying there for a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Common way of handling depression is just, there's a joke that I like that says, whenever I get the urge to work out, I lie down until it goes away. And, but it's a great joke, but it's also like a very depressed kind of response to things. I'm just going to lie down until this goes away. And it sounds like maybe you were trying that out. Can I just wait this out? Can I just sit this out? Can I just endure until it's over?
Something like that, yeah. And like, this was the summer before college, and I was very excited about college. So I figured like maybe it's just summer blues. Like I'm anxious to get out of the house. I'm anxious to move on. There were a lot of things I could justify as like, why this thing might go away. But yeah, certainly like I wasn't really under the illusion of like, oh, this is for specific things.
Yeah. And for context, just for people who don't know your story, I'd like to add that, that summer before college, you were, I believe, the valedictorian of your high school, and you went to a good college. And so in a sense, like it could have been a peak point for you. It could have been like, look at everything. I finally did it. Here I am, top of my high school, going to a good school to continue my education, gonna meet a ton of professors. Maybe you did or did not know that would happen. Gonna have a great time. But instead, it wasn't a peak point. Despite everything you had accomplished, you felt low.
So first of all, I don't want to take too much credit. I was salutatorian.
Oh, well, forgive me.
But yeah, this is the other thing that about me that perhaps a lot of people don't is I'm very uncomfortable with praise and compliments and things like that. And
I do know that.
And yeah, like throughout my whole academic career, there was like tons of praise being heaped on me by family, teachers, fellow students. Christophe later on. Thank God I didn't know you in high school.
You would have hated me.
So that part wasn't strange to me. I mean, I wasn't expecting to feel like on top of the world, like for having achieved like some like pinnacle of high school academic success.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing I love about this conversation is most of my guesses are wrong. And I love how clear you are about that, which doesn't make them meaningless because they serve the function of clarifying your story. And I play the role of the joker, so to speak, the guy who might not know what your story would be like. So I ask the questions I ask, and I give the perspectives that would relate to my own experience, and it's beautiful to hear your responses. But you had, if I can interpret this correctly, you had a certain sense of meaning in life derived out of the possibility of contributing scientifically to the world in a way that made the world better, which endured for a certain period of time. You knew that you were numb to compliments and praise, or maybe even more than that, irritated by them. And so you knew that accomplishment itself wasn't going to make you happy because you don't prioritize praise. It doesn't make you happy. But when you had this internal shift within you, some of it emotional, some of it seemingly intellectual, you switched over to religion and philosophy to explore the presence of pain and joy and other things which felt very alien to you and which you thought you might develop an intimate relationship with through consulting with the great writers. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, let's fill in that time gap, because yeah, I think that's fair, but I'll definitely want to expand on that a bit more. So I was following this literary trail. Um, I was reading some things which I loved, some things which I hated, and trying to figure out what the difference was. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, eventually I kind of like picked out that common thread as uh, religion and philosophy, which is weird to me because in my early childhood, certainly religion was like a big part of my life, but teenage years onward, it wasn't at all. And so it was weird to me that I would find myself sort of like, uh, I don't know, all of a sudden having an interest in that kind of thing. Um, on the other hand, it's not super surprising because I think I was immediately drawn more towards East Asian religions, um,
Mm-hmm.
which, I mean, if I could explain it in retrospect, was probably just something that felt refreshingly new and like, I needed some new orientation in life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, that's kind of like where that initially arose. And I think like in an effort to sort of like find or establish some kind of continuity between like meaning in early life with meaning at that moment, was reflecting a lot on the fact that my father was always really into martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
Got into martial arts when he was in college, and specifically Japanese martial arts, and kind of just reflecting upon that, like, okay, maybe while I'm reading some of this stuff that theoretically should feel very foreign to me, and it doesn't, it feels very familiar. Maybe that's because my father's value system was probably deeply inspired by a lot of what he was learning through martial arts, and certainly martial arts, particularly in East Asia, has deep roots in religious philosophies like Taoism and Buddhism and things like that.
Could
Um,
you give an illustration of like one, let's say Buddhist or Taoist way of thinking that you felt you were exposed to in your childhood?
yeah, so the big one for me is this principle in Taoism, um, that is usually translated to something like actionless action or spontaneous action. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and this is like the main philosophy behind what's called like soft martial arts. So like things like Aikido or Judo, where you hear about like, using your opponent's strength against them, um, as opposed to, like more brute force kind of hard martial arts,
Mm-hmm.
where it's about overpowering the opponent. Um, for everyone's reference, I'm 5'7", probably on a good day. My father is like 5'4". Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it made sense to him to get involved in something like Aikido, where Aikido is really heavily based around finding pressure points and things like that, where it doesn't matter how big the other person is, sort of anatomically, if you hit the right spots, they're going to go down. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's what drew him into that. Anyway, Bruce Lee was very into Taoism. So in terms of his personal philosophy and his martial arts philosophy, he was, I would say, very much into this idea of, he would say like, be like water. Water is
Mm-hmm.
like a um, big piece of imagery in Taoism, because it's this force of nature that um, is on the one hand like very soft. It's a liquid, it's not a solid, it's not something like a rock like that you normally associate with hardness or strength.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, water erodes mountains, water causes all sorts of destruction. It's like a very powerful force, um,
Mm-hmm.
but it's sort of like sneakily powerful. So anyway, this idea of actionless action, spontaneous action in Taoism that's influenced a lot of Chinese and Japanese martial arts. Basically, the idea is if you wait for your opponent to make the first move, then you have sort of like a natural advantage. More specifically, doing so with sort of like a calm presence of mind. I guess the best way to explain why that works is because if your mind is cluttered with sort of like expectations of what you expect your opponent to do, then you're not going to be able to react in time. So like if I'm expecting you to throw like, you know, a right hook or something, then I'm already prepared for that. If you happen to throw a left hook, then I'm going to get laid out. So that's kind of like the martial arts side of it. But the way I remember learning about that as sort of like a life philosophy growing up, it was actually like an academic thing. My dad was telling me about how, you know, because he picked up martial arts in college, it was something that, you know, he found really valuable while he was studying, and eventually went on to law school. And he said that his martial arts teacher told him something that was really valuable and stuck with him for, you know, the rest of his academic life, because he wasn't a great student. But his martial arts teacher told him, like, when you have a big test, you know, do all your studying like a few weeks ahead of time, and then like, you know, a week leading up to the test or a couple days leading up to the test, like, don't do anything, don't study at all, don't look at books, like, just enjoy yourself. And you know, he said he ended up taking the bar, and like during lunch breaks in between the exam and stuff, he'd see people like with their books open, like trying to cram, and like, you know, and a lot of his classmates who he thought were a lot smarter than him failed, and he passed on the first try. And he really credited a lot of that to that approach. Like he did that, he studied really hard, and then like a week before, he just went out with friends to the movies, did his martial arts. Yeah, I thought that was like really powerful advice, and I started doing that when I had big exams in school, and it worked.
Now I know your secret.
And now everyone does. It's out there.
It's out there. You can't take it back now. We're all gonna do it, Alan.
There goes my my
edge
opportunity to monetize my brilliant insights into testing strategies.
Yeah, no, you can no longer do one of those YouTube ad videos where you're like, do you struggle with tests? Well, if you give me just 10 minutes, I'll tell you the secret of how to, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So basically
sorry, that went on for a long time.
It was beautiful. It was beautiful. And you shouldn't apologize. But can I try to develop what the parallel that you developed is?
Yes. That would be very helpful.
So if I understand correctly, essentially, actionless action is about almost minimizing effort, maximizing result to a degree. And it's not about, conjuring up within you this great brute will where you just overpower things. But instead, what is it like to go the easy route and find power there? And you applied this as a philosophy to life, in part, even academic life, because you went the route of, well, you do all your work and everything when you're not stressed about learning. And then when the stress period comes, you relax. And this was actionless action to you because it allowed you to effortlessly maximize your results. Even though it's not necessarily the case that the results are all you care about, the effortlessness is something that's important to you, and preserving that in your life, that you do things in a way that isn't about conjuring up a brute and overbearing power within you. It's actually about letting the relaxation take over, keeping the calm mindset, and you found a myriad of tactics to keep the calm mindset. Does that sound like a fair understanding of the parallel?
Yeah, that's a good explanation of the parallel. I would say like the one important thing to modify there, or not modify, but add on to that will, I think further the story I'm weaving here is it wasn't just about me applying that to my life. It was more so like me realizing how much it had already applied to my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know to what extent like the nature nurture balance was instrumental in that. I don't know if just like by nature I happen to be like this very calm, reserved person, or if it was, had more to do with like being raised by my father or like other areas of socialization, because I did martial arts growing up as well. My dad got my brother and I both into karate when I was 5 years old through when I was 11 or something like that.
Yeah.
But
And I remember, I'll just say this very briefly, that you kept practicing martial arts, and you once introduced me to a friend of yours, and the way she described getting to know you was watching you do martial arts from a distance, and she added in all kinds of things. She was like, and then he did a flip, and you're like, I didn't flip.
I was doing Tai Chi. I was like, it's the chillest form of martial arts possible. There's no flipping. Yeah. I mean, I'm capable of more athletic feats of martial arts, but like that's not what was going on. I don't know where she was getting that.
I don't know. The difference between your take and her take was enormous, to a
It
point where I
was.
almost wonder if you were doing martial arts and a few feet away from you there was some guy doing like excessively acrobatic things, and she
Maybe
actually just mistook you for him.
maybe I was channeling some spirit of martial arts ancestry
Oh yeah, that sounds fair.
inhabiting me and making me do flips even though I wasn't aware of it.
Beyond your conscious experience. Yeah. Well, I think something like that must explain the situation. So you did the martial arts, and you rightfully acknowledge that it would be very hard to distinguish whether you're a naturally calm person or your socialization process kind of made you calm,
Yeah,
or
but
most
just
likely a
to
combination of both, right?
yeah, and just to like sort of further elaborate with maybe like one more example, but um or maybe a couple more examples, like to draw out the academic thing a bit more. It wasn't just about like test taking, but I guess because I was always so successful academically, like people naturally ask me, like, you know, what's your secret? Or even if people weren't asking me that, I think people just kind of assumed that I was like, busting my ass or whatever. I certainly worked hard in school, but it didn't feel like I didn't have to force myself to do anything. You know what I mean? Because to me, all I was doing was following my own natural curiosity. Like I
Mm-hmm.
did well in school because I genuinely wanted to learn about stuff. And
Yeah.
so I think, my success in school is partly attributable to work or hard work, but the hard work itself was kind of just like something like an accident or like just fortuitous circumstances for me that I just happened to enjoy studying. um,
Yeah.
but
It's a lucky.
I
And I'll
do
say
kind
really
of
quickly, or go on.
count that as an example of the same thing though. That
Mm-hmm.
like it's not like they're like I think that's the nuance with this idea of like actionless action, because without like the full context, it's easy to see it as like a statement of like, pacifism or laziness or something like that. And like that's not what it's about. That like there's work happening, but um it's happening uh it's happening effortlessly in some form or another.
I'd like to expand on that, even referencing my own experience, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Which is, I say this about my own work ethic as well. I consider myself to have an artist's mindset, which say I'm so inflamed by passion, which is sort of the condition that I hear you adding, is I'm so inflamed by passion that I work with an immense enthusiasm, which makes me oblivious to the fact that I'm working. I can
You're
do
an
things that would fatigue other people,
you're
and
an
I don't get tired.
overflowing uncorked bottle of Christophe.
I am an overflowing, uncorked bottle of Christophe. I cannot escape the pressure that's built up, and I just have to jump out of the bottle all the time, you know? It's what I do. So I don't know if that's necessarily the same as your experience, but it would sound like you were talking about enjoyment, and I'm substituting enjoyment for passion. And maybe that's the Alan Christoph difference. But, you know, for me, passion makes working effortless
Hmm.
because you go into what psychologists call the flow state, first off, where time essentially perishes and you're so concentrated on the task, you're oblivious to the demands the task is putting on you. But also, beyond just this psychological terminology, you're with it. You feel great because of what you're doing. So you keep doing it.
Yeah. Um, and you know, like I think I realized that all of that was true, but that it didn't have to end there. Like I didn't have to rely on like passion to sort of like institute this principle in my life.
Mhm.
Because like so, you know, like the academic stuff, that was one instance in which all of that was happening like unconsciously. Same thing with I think like social stuff. Like, you know, I'm kind of a reserved person. Only more so when I was younger. But I never found it hard to make friends. Um,
Mhm.
I didn't really like try very hard to make friends. It just sort of like would happen. Um,
Mhm.
and so, you know, there's some things in my life that I can kind of trace back and be like, this sort of like actionless action thing was like kind of working on its own. Um, but then there's other things where I think I kind of like found ways to exercise it more consciously. Like, for instance, like anytime I've tried to sort of like better my diet, like, you know, when I was a kid, I like, as kids do, I ate a lot of candy, I drank a lot of sugary shit. um
Yeah.
at a certain point I was like, this is fucking ridiculous. I shouldn't be doing this. um but you know, I wasn't gonna like give up everything, so it was, you know, I the way I thought about it was like a very reasoned approach of like, okay, what's going to be like the easiest thing for me to give up that's going to have like a big impact, right? Like maybe I don't have to drink Gatorade at every meal.
Yeah.
And then
And
I can keep eating candy. Um, so that
And the
that's
first time you and I had a long conversation, you had
here
just
here we
pillaged a
go.
candy store.
Here we
I
go.
can't get over it. That's how you introduced yourself to me. You were like, "Oh man, I went into a candy store. There was so much good candy, and I just took it all." And I was like, "This guy's great." He's, so it's ironic that you're bringing up candy again.
I think
Now,
I think I'm probably the first person to confess to that kind of vice inside of a bar.
yeah, I know. There we are in a bar, and you're like, "Yeah, man, I went to a candy store. I really couldn't control myself. I had to get all the candy." So, you know, it's
Yeah,
great
so
though.
that's just kind of like, you know, a silly example, but it like I've done that in a lot of aspects of my life, you know, when I want to make a change. Like it's sort of like what's like the low hanging fruit here? Like where can I make an easy change that has a big
Mhm.
impact? And again, like to invoke this image of water that's like really prevalent in Taoism, the idea is like water naturally tends downward. So,
Mhm.
you know, the path of least resistance is to like, you know, or taking the path of least resistance is sort of like the way of flourishing in life, I guess, is the attitude. Like if you imagine
Mhm.
someone in like a river or something, like you try and swim upstream, you're just gonna like get knocked down and get hurt. If you go with the flow, um, you know, you're kind of moving more. I mean, hopefully you don't end up like coming to a waterfall or something like that, but
Yeah.
but that's the general idea. You move with the flow of life, not against it. And I think there's a lot of ways to enact that. So in some ways, I guess that's what was going on with the literature stuff. Is I was like, you know, there's something like unfolding itself. I'm not going to try to stand in the way of it. I'm just going to sort of like follow it, because I could have fought against like all of the thoughts and feelings I was having, and been like no, I've committed to this plan of like studying science, and like I'm just gonna do that. And
Right.
and I think what the stuff I was reading at the time was really instrumental in me being like, no, it's okay, like to like just kind of divert in the way that I'm going. Um, and it's been like that ever since. My first semester in college, like between kind of like the groundlessness of not really knowing what I was studying anymore, and the intensification of mental health symptoms, I ended up dropping out of college my first semester, or my second
Mm.
semester. Um, and I mean, it freaked everyone out, right? Like my parents and my brother, like, our golden child who was always a straight A student is like dropping out of college. Like, what the hell?
Right.
And
Yeah. How could that possibly happen?
yeah, and I didn't do it with the intention of never going back. Like I was
Hmm.
very like meticulous about it. I went to the dean's office. I was like, I need time away. Like, how feasible is it for me to do that? And like, what's the degree of assurance that I can come back? And like he was really upfront with me, and he was like, the fact that you're like doing this in this measured way is gonna like go a long way towards, you know, like us taking you back. And I was
That's
able to come
fantastic.
back eventually. Um, but yeah,
Hmm.
like to me, on one level, I was like, this is crazy. And on another level, I was like, I feel very strongly like this is where life is leading me.
Oh, that's fantastic. So we are actually, and I know it might be disappointing news for you, but we're actually at the hour point now.
We are
So
at the hour point.
I think that we have the option of maybe another time continuing the dialogue. Since given all my Christophe interruptions, I feel like you had more you were going to say. But what you said was extremely powerful to me. This actionless action philosophy that shaped your way of existing is not widely spread. It's not how everybody feels life, especially if you look at all the motivational videos that say, what makes the lion the king? The lion is stronger because it has a greater will, and all
Are
these videos.
are you saying that I am not overflowing with toxic masculinity?
I'm suggesting that, yeah. I'm implying that you are not overflowing with toxic masculinity. And in a time where that is overflowing, it's a relief to hear somebody who's not. So I thought it was a beautiful discussion, but I'll let you have the final word and then just end the video when you're ready.
Yeah, so to dive a bow around it, I think I think this is a good natural stopping point, because I think we basically got to the end of like childhood to like the legal end of childhood in my life at
Yeah.
18. Um, and I would say, this has been more about like the loss of meaning of life, but
Mhm.
but definitely I'll have more to say about the, rediscovery or reimagining of meaning of life as I experienced it uh, between then and now, college, graduate school, my professional life so far. So stay tuned,
Oh, I will.
and we'll see you next time.